Greetings, everybody. I am Durwood Murray, and welcome to the maiden voyage, the very first episode of Living Room Libations. We're here to share a drink, some conversation, discuss a little history, and give you some things to discuss on your own, some conversation starters, if you will. We'll talk about some books, we'll talk about some movies, and if we're going to talk about a drink on our maiden voyage, I can't think of a better place to start than the Cuba Libre, a drink that definitely has a lot of history behind it, a drink that is certainly one of my very favorites. When I started my career in drinking, I certainly did start with the Cuba Libre. In fact, why don't we go ahead and get one built right now? We'll get our discussion started that way. All right, let's do it. Let's build this Cuba Libre. So we're going to need a tall glass with ice. This one goes on the rocks. We're also going to need white rum. That's what this is right here. And then we're going to need cola. Do not let this white band fool you. This is regular cola. I just pulled off a label because we ain't getting paid here. All we're going to do here. This is a typical ounce and fill drink. When we talk more about mixology in later episodes, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about there. But we're just going to pour off an ounce. If you want to measure it for sure, you certainly can do that. I'm going to eyeball it here. And because I'm making this drink for me, right. And then we are going to fill with our fabulous cola. It happens off screen because a 2-liter requires 2 hands to pour. And most importantly, for this particular drink that we are making, because we are making a Cuba Libre and not a rum and coke, we are going to need lime juice, which I like to get straight from a real lime. My technique, right around the rim here with that lime wedge, squeeze right in there, and then right into the cup. Give it a little bit of a swirl. Yeah. If you did just what I did, you did something pretty close to perfection. Oh. Let's go back over to the table. We'll further this discussion. Cuba Libre. The name actually means Free Cuba and was a slogan for Cubans during its move for independence that came around the Spanish-American War. After Cuba got its independence, rum sales, of course, boomed, and that, of course, did increase the popularity of the Cuba Libre drink. Coca-Cola, ever since its inception, was a popular mixer for cocktails. So after the Cuban Revolution, Bacardi flees to Puerto Rico. The U.S. puts an embargo on Cuba. So we can't get Coca-Cola to Cuba, we can't get Cuban rum to America. Thus, the ingredients necessary for Cuba Libre cannot really be enjoyed in their original form. I asked around if anybody had any good Cuban Revolution jokes. Author Kim Keyline said that the only ones that she knew were quite revolting. And I thank you, Kim, for setting the bar for jokes on this show. So if we're talking about the history of the Cuba Libre, we're taking it back to the early 1900s. Pretty much at 1900, maybe even a little bit before, in, of course, Cuba. For those of you who haven't been able to figure it out by now, maybe you did not take Spanish when you were in high school, Cuba Libre means Free Cuba, and its origins are in the Spanish-American War, which did happen around that time, with the heavy influence of Americans in Cuba, of course with the rum that is prevalent in Cuba from the sugarcane crops there. The earliest drinks were actually made with brown sugar and water as its mixer instead of the cola as we know it today. However, around this time is when in America a crazy invention called Coca-Cola came to be, and with that, and also it being able to be exported to Cuba at this time, that became the prevalent mixer for the Cuba Libre and the origin of the drink as we know it today. However, as you may know with Cuba and embargoes, of course, Bacardi, the rum factory that was in Cuba, went to Puerto Rico. Coca Cola can no longer be exported to Cuba. A drink was hard to be made with its actual origin ingredients, where it was actually originated. But in time, with Coca Cola becoming more popular in the southern United States, of course, the Cuba Libre became a very popular drink around that area. Then in time, it did spread to the up the East Coast into the Northeast, and then finally going across to the West. The origins as we know it today. The sweet, sweet Cuba Libre. Fulgencio Batista, a former soldier in Cuba, actually became an elected official and served as president for Cuba from 1940 to 1944. He canceled the elections for 1952 and named himself president. Batista had been relatively progressive during his first term, but after he canceled that election and took over, he became more and more dictatorial. That, of course, did not sit well with very many people in Cuba. One person in particular rallied a lot of Cubans against him. That person, Fidel Castro. I think that you've heard of him. Castro tried to wrestle power away from Batista legally in court, but it was rejected. So he decided a revolution was in order and started a group called the Movement. The movement stockpiled weapons and gathered many disgruntled blue collar workers around Cuba. And by the end of 1952, they were able to actually take over power. And Fidel Castro's reign is the power that many of us grew up knowing. To continue this conversation with others who may not be with you or are with you, others that are watching along with you, I'd like to make a book recommendation and a movie recommendation in theme with what we're talking about today. This time we actually have a twofer. This is a book and a movie. It's called The Motorcycle Diaries. The Motorcycle Diaries is the memoir of Ernesto Guevara, who later became known internationally as, I'm sure you all know, the Marxist guerrilla and revolutionary Che Guevara. And of course, there's the book Cuba Libre by Elmore Leonard. It takes place right before the outbreak of the Spanish-American War. If it's Elmore Leonard, then it's got to be good. And if you're looking for something a little more recent, there's the 2008 release of Che Part 1, starring Benicio del Toro as Che Guevara. Perhaps you have a movie or a book that you'd like to recommend that's on theme. Perhaps you have a drink to recommend for our next episode. Thank you for joining us on our maiden voyage where we explored the Cuba Libre. Next time we'll mix up a little bit something different. We'll have a little bit different conversation. But the conversation about the Cuba Libre does not have to end today. We can continue this on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. Talk amongst yourselves. Talk to me. Let's make this a collaboration that is ongoing. Let's find a way to enjoy ourselves with a good drink, good conversation, good books, good movies. Want to find us on Twitter at Living Our Libations, on Instagram at Living Room Libations, in the Facebook group of that same name. Next time we'll be mixing up something different, and we're still going to have a good time. I'll talk to you all later. Cheers. You all have a good time. We'll talk to you later.
If I have learned anything from television, and it has taught me nearly everything I know, we're addicted to lowered inhibitions. You can change the channel, but you cannot stop the show.